How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Chair Talk. Guys, we're going to revisit again the Jacqueline Torres-Garcia case, otherwise known as Mimi, a 11-year-old little girl who sadly was found in a plastic storage tote earlier, October 8th of this year. It looks like she had been there for over a year. And today we're going to explore the family dynamic. My guest today is going to be Shavaun Scott. I'm going to bring her on real quick. Hello, Shavaun.
Thank you for having me.
Shavaun, I'm a big fan of your work. I see you on Tony Bruschi, Hidden Killers. So that's, I know he doesn't know me. My kids think I kind of look like him a little bit.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I sorry, Tony. She's a good guest, and I stole her just for a moment. But Shavaun, you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Yeah, I have been a psychotherapist since 1991, and while I've always been in private practice, I have worked in forensic programs. I've worked in substance abuse treatment programs, a lot of work with victims in domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers, and I work with all ages from kids as young as 2 to I think my oldest client is 89. So I've got a lot of experience in, well, we'll just say the dark side. I've done mobile crisis work with law enforcement. So it's hard to think of a job that I haven't done in some capacity. And so as I've gotten older, I've started writing books, have written several books. And I would say my heart is with victims of violent crime. That's always been something that I've focused on a lot.
Well, watching the shows you do, what I've seen, your experience definitely adds to every case that's being discussed that I've seen. You're one of the few people that I've reached out to, and I watch a lot of true crime stuff. So I thank you for taking your time to come on the channel. I just want to give people a quick little backdrop in case people aren't familiar with some updates. But if you're not familiar, this is Jacqueline Torres-Garcia Mimi. She was 11 years old when her remains were found on October 8, 2025, sealed inside a large plastic storage tote behind an abandoned home in New Britain, Connecticut. Investigators believe she died more than a year earlier in September 2024. They believe the actual date is September 19th while living with her mother, which is, all right, so let's see. Her mother is on the left. That's Carla Garcia. Her boyfriend, Jonathan Anita, he's on the right, and the sister in the middle who visited the home multiple times. That's Jacqueline. That's Jacqueline Garcia, that's Jacqueline Garcia. Let me just make sure. Yep, Jacqueline Garcia. She's in the middle, and she also has involvement. And it was crazy because we recently read the arrest warrants, and the details did come out as to what they did. So I just want to read the most current and recent news that we got on this. So according to unsealed arrest warrants, Mimi had been severely malnourished, weighing just 26 to 27 pounds, and had been restrained with zip ties when she misbehaved. Her mother later admitted to withholding food as punishment. So the mother has been charged with murder with special circumstances, which is the highest level in Connecticut for the charge. That special circumstances adds a level of severity to that charge. You also got conspiracy, cruelty to a child, tampering with evidence, and disposal of a body. Jonathan Anita, who's the boyfriend, same primary counts I just mentioned, plus he was received a few new charges: improper disposal of human remains and tampering. And Jacqueline Garcia, the aunt, has unlawful restraint, risk of injury to a child, and intentional cruelty. Mimi, just background, Mimi, or Jacqueline Torres, was withdrawn from public school in August of 2024 under the guise of homeschooling. DCF conducted a video wellness check in January of 2025, but investigators now say another child posed as Mimi during that call. The family had prior DCF contact, though no report specifically alleging starvation or abuse of Mimi. The household moved repeatedly, complicating tracking and oversight, and neighbors reported yelling, neglect, and children carrying groceries unsupervised. Her father, Victor Torres, had spent years trying to regain contact and reportedly requested wellness checks that went unheeded. This case has triggered statewide reforms under review, mandate in-person welfare checks rather than video calls, requiring photo ID verification of children during visits, strengthening oversight of homeschooling families, which we were talking about before the show started, involved in child welfare cases. And Governor Lamont recently nominated Christina D. Gio, Ghio, as the new state child advocate, emphasizing this case as a catalyst for systemic change. And then I just want to give the family dynamic breakdown. So Mimi had lived for nearly a decade with her paternal grandmother, because in June, in 2013, Carla gave birth to Jacqueline Torres-Garcia in a detention center. So that's where Child Protective Services first got involved. And then the guardians were the grandparents of the paternal side, which would have been Victor Torres, and then in 2022, they fought for custody. That would have been Carla and Victor. They won, and then eventually, Victor wanted to get joint custody to kind of Carla left Victor, wind up being with Jonathan and Nita. Victor wind up not going to court. Carla was given sole custody, and that was around June of 2024. And then sadly in August, Carla takes Jacqueline Mimi Torres out of public school, says she's going to homeschool her. And then by September 19th of that year in 2024, they believe that Jacqueline had died after 2 weeks of starvation. So Mimi had lived for nearly a decade with her paternal grandmother before being returned to her mother's custody in 2024. Soon after, she was isolated from school and outside contact within the home. Carla Garcia reportedly imposed strict punitive discipline. Nanita allegedly participated in the restraint and starvation. Some even say, or Carla has tried to say, that Jonathan and Anita was the reason that it was being done, that he was the one that was in control. And Jacqueline Garcia, who had prior charges for child endangerment, admitted seeing the abuse. And the environment was one of control, secrecy, and isolation, with homeschooling and frequent moves serving to conceal neglect. Mimi's world shrank until every external support system, teachers, relatives, and caseworkers, was cut off. And the last part I got before we get to the interview is just some background of each individual. Carla Rosalie Garcia in April 2019. Outside of when she was a younger kid, in 2019, she was convicted of third-degree assault for an incident in New Britain where she punched another woman in the face. She received a suspended 1-year jail sentence and 2 years of probation. In the arrest warrants for Mimi's death, she admitted to starving and restraining her daughter with zip ties, withholding food for about 2 weeks prior to the child's death. Jonathan Abel Nanita, that's the boyfriend, his prior criminal history includes convictions for first-degree reckless endangerment and interfering with an officer, resisting arrest. The incident referenced he nearly dragged a New Britain police officer during a traffic stop in 2020, and he was sentenced to 364 days in jail in January of 2023. In this latest case, excuse me, he is also charged with murder with special circumstances, disposal of a body, tampering with evidence in Mimi's death. And Jacqueline Leanne Garcia, that's the mother's sister or the aunt. Jacqueline is who she's named after. She pleaded guilty in September 2024 to risk of injury to a child for an offense that took place in 2022. She was sentenced in December of 2024 to a 10-year sentence, suspended after 18 months plus 5 years of probation. At the time of her arrest in the Mimi's case, she was under transitional supervision, which is like akin to parole, when she was charged again with first-degree unlawful restraint, intentional cruelty to a child, and risk of injury to a child. Okay, so that's all the backup. There's a lot here, and thank you so much, Shavaun, for being patient. I just wanted to kind of put that all out there for people that are not familiar with the case. But what's your thoughts so far before we dive in deep? I mean, did a young child like this even have a chance in a household that we just mentioned?
No. I don't think anybody would listen to the history here and say, gee, these were optimal parents. You know, there are people who are not safe to be raising puppies. And certainly this little girl was in a stable home for the first 10 years of her life. She was doing well. And this is a dramatic case of system failure here. And living in a civilized society, these kinds of things should not be allowed to happen. It's really a red flag of the problems in our system. Just awful.
Can I add, you made a very good point there real quick. Sometimes they figure that they want to bring the child to the mother, even after she was in a stable household with the paternal grandparents. She was the oldest of all the kids. She was with the paternal grandparents, Victor's father and mother. They said that they were with her from a month of her being brought into the world, because I guess when Child Protective Services got involved, they gave guardianship to the grandparents, and then to take her away after 9 years. Is that really in the benefit of the child? Or are we just going by the label of mother?
Yeah, the court system traditionally has had a bias toward reunifying families, meaning back with the biological parents, that this was somehow supposed to be the first priority. There's a big pushback on that now, and we need to keep pushing back on it, because just because somebody gives birth to a child does not mean that they can bond with the child, that they can nurture the child, that they can have a healthy attachment, or build a stable home environment. And the court system in some places does a better job, but in this case, it did not. And this, looking at the arrest history here with these people, the history of other reports to Child Protection Services, this is just a tragedy. Should not have happened. The court needs to prioritize safety of the children above all.
Yeah, I agree. Would it get to a point where they believe that the family reunification is so important that they will do whatever they can to push for that mother and daughter connection, even if the mother tends not to be the best candidate for that position?
Yeah. There are a lot of people who are capable of giving birth, but they are not capable of providing a stable, healthy attachment. They're not capable of loving their kids, basically.
Yeah, and when you see her raised by the grandparents for 9 years in a stable household, and then just deciding to uproot the child and just handing her over to the mother, who probably had little to do with her at that point, I wouldn't see how that would benefit the child, but rather just maybe, okay, you're with your mother, but we can't just toss you with your mother, because
Right.
you have an established relationship here with your grandparents. So at that point, do they actually think that maybe the best interest would be to keep the child with the grandparents, because it has been 9 years, those formative bonding years?
It certainly would be what I would look at from a developmental perspective. That's what the child needs. You want to keep a kid in a stable home. You want to
Right.
keep them where they feel secure, where they've done well in school, where they have stability. And I often see the court ruling in that direction, but sometimes you see these other things where they seem to go for, reunification of the biological parents. And that's not the way it should be going. And I think there is a big movement to push back on that now.
Are the parental rights so powerful that, even though the child's already in a stable home, you don't want to challenge the parental right? Could that be the concern?
There is a big movement of people who have lost their kids, I think often for very good reasons, and they've banded together and have kind of formed parental rights organizations where they're determined that the best outcome in all situations is for biological parents to be raising their children. But I think many of us would dispute that and argue against it. I certainly do.
Yeah, I agree, especially because you're going from one stable household to an unknown, and that change for the child has to be drastic, because you're moving them away from what they're comfortable with, what they've known, and now introducing them to an unknown. And I think, to be honest, just in my mind, I think that was a concern in this household. I think there was something with this, basically her being in that stable home with the grandparents from the father's side, and then now probably being treated as an outcast in this home, because I don't see anything else. Out of all the kids she has, I think there's 5 kids, 2 from Victor Torres and 3 from Jonathan and Anita. The only concern we have right now seems to be Mimi, even though her younger sister was also, or younger sibling, I don't know if it's a sister or brother, was also taken care of by the grandparents. I have a feeling in my mind that Mimi's connection, because she's probably a little bit older, to the grandparents was something that the mother couldn't break and maybe wanted to break. Maybe.
Hmm. Yeah, you have to wonder what the mother's motivation was. Was she hoping for some kind of financial compensation or some kind of benefit from getting her daughter back? But it certainly wasn't a healthy attachment or the desire to give that little girl a good life.
Yeah, and that kind of that really does break your heart, because in the end, if I was a person that was in the system, if I was the mother, and I gave birth to a child, and my child had to be given up to, at least, thank God it didn't go to the system. It went to the parents of the father, which is, that's great, believe it or not, compared to what I've seen working in the system. I've seen
Yeah,
babies, mothers give birth, and the mothers have said, I don't want the kid at all.
yeah,
And they just come in. They don't even ask her twice. They take the kid, and then it gets tossed through the system because there's nobody there to claim the child.
yeah.
In this case, you had the. I would say, you know what? At this point, I'll be involved with the child, but I'm not going to selfishly uproot the child from a life that they've gone comfortable with, because in the end, this is her family, and I can't expect her to see me in that light after being absent to some level for 9 years. So I think it is a very selfish choice, sorry, but to uproot the
Hmm.
child after they've been with a loving family for 9 years. For me, I see it as more of control. I mean, it is an ex-boyfriend or whatever, ex-husband, whatever that relationship was. So it's not so much even what's best for the child. It's just, I don't want to be connected to him, and therefore the paternal parents are a connection to him. So we're going to have nothing to do with that. And I'm going to take her, I'm going to uproot her, and I'm going to go ahead and regardless of what she wants, we're going to take care of her.
Hmm.
I think that's unfair, and that kind of brings us into what we were discussing a little bit earlier before the show started. So from your perspective, for me, the first red flags that stood out, especially around homeschooling, isolation, and control inside this family, was when I think when she got the sole custody, took the kid into homeschooling around August of 2024 that year, and then there's no checks, there's no nothing,
Hmm.
and in less than a month, there's a message to her sister Jacqueline saying that, because Jacqueline already knew that this girl was tied with zip ties. If you look at the arrest warrant, she may even been a part of that. That's the sister. That she wasn't eating, she was being starved, she was on pee pads, and then there's a text message or a message from Carla to Jacqueline telling Jacqueline September 19th that Jacqueline had died, the daughter had died. So at this point here, the moment they took that child from away from the school, anybody that could have oversight for her, anybody that could have been a voice for her, that angel for her, was immediately eliminated, correct?
Yeah, 100%. When I was raising my kids in the 80s and 90s in California, there were a lot of homeschooling parents, and most of them were doing it for religious reasons. They wanted their kids to study the Bible and, not be polluted by secular culture and all of that. But it was surprising to me to see that there was zero oversight, at least at that time. And all people had to do was just basically call the school and say, the kids aren't coming back, we're homeschooling now. So there was no discussion of what are they being taught, who is teaching them, is there a curriculum, is there any kind of oversight at all. They just went into complete isolation. And so when you have people who are really pathological, who are criminally oriented, who are violent, who are substance users, all kinds of terrible things can happen. And yes, if we're going to allow homeschooling, some people feel very strongly about it, and not everybody does it for pathological reasons. There can be some fairly benign reasons that they want to do this. But I do think we need to have oversight, and we do need to have home visits, and the school district still needs to be involved in whatever we're calling homeschooling here. They need to have an eye in the door.
Yeah, I agree. And when I was watching some of the specials on this that the news was doing, and my wife also being a teacher, schools serve the function as the first responders to some extent to children that are being abused, neglected, or whatnot. So, I mean, now you're eliminating probably the best resource we have that let us know if there's problems happening to our children. So it's not so much about, oversight of the curriculum, but rather, hey, I get you want to homeschool, but this kid doesn't just disappear from our oversight. There has to be some follow up or something, so we know that the kid is okay. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
would you agree? That's for me, I would say that would be the primary. If somebody wanted to go to homeschool and they're just pulling the kid out, it's like, okay, but I just want to make sure, because this could be a great way to hide a child now
Yeah.
too. What are
Yeah.
we doing to balance that?
Yeah, it makes me think of that family in California. I forget their last name, but they had the 13 kids that had never been in school, and the kids were horribly abused and starved and chained to beds and just, tortured, essentially. Very similar case. And it went on for years and years and years with these kids who grew up that way. And so the school, you're right, is the first point of contact for people who can notice, are these kids healthy? Are they being fed? Do they have signs of abuse? Are they injured in some way? And that's got to be the number one priority. And it's sad that we live in a society where we have to look at the schools as being the first responders in that sense for noticing these things and making the mandated reporters. And of course, then the academics are a secondary concern, but safety first.
Yeah, I looked it up. You're talking about the Turpin case.
Turpins, yes,
Wow,
yes.
look at these two. Yeah, let me give them no oversight.
Yeah, they were basically a family religious cult, and very cruel and violent, and 13 children that they kept in the home, and basically hid them away, and just a house of horrors. That was just a few years ago.
I'm going to have to look into. I was not aware of that,
Hmm.
so thank you for bringing
Hmm.
that in.
Hmm.
One of the things I mentioned as we talk about homeschool and isolation and control inside this family, you know what made me get a little upset with this is that they were so comfortable once the child, I guess, no longer had the school oversight, that they tortured the child, they starved the child, because they knew at that point there was no protection anymore for this child. Because to me, when you have a child zip tied, starving, you got the child isolated from any support. Definitely premeditated, obviously, 100%. But the moment they took him out of the school and they could control anybody else that wants to see him, like telling the grandparents she's too busy, we can't get her, whatever it is. So making sure that no outside contact can come and check on how the girl's doing well, and then obviously later on. Playing a game with child services as well, when they didn't do the home check and they did it through a video. This girl never stood a chance, because the school was that girl's last protection, because that's the one thing that the parents couldn't, or Carla couldn't control until she took the girl out.
Hmm. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And to watch the progression, it would be fascinating. We will never probably have all the information, but about how quickly the abuse started after
Ooh.
Mimi went back into her care was probably almost immediate.
I 100% agree with you. I think the moment that they pulled her out was probably the process of when it was already happening, and they said, you know what, we can't bring this girl back to school,
Right.
so let's pull her out now, because you know, if we put her in, we're all caught.
Right.
That's power. I agree with that. And then how does abuse escalate in homes where multiple adults, like the mother, boyfriend, and the aunt, who pretty much did nothing, but then they said in the arrest warrant she may have even been involved in restraining her, reinforce each other's authority instead of protecting the child?
Hmm. I think you have a family of disordered people, and it becomes this closed system where outsiders are kept away, and the people within the system reinforce each other. Now, sometimes there can be a dominating person who really is kind of the ringleader, and the abusive person who has control over everybody. But it really sounds like in this case, each of those people were part of this collusion. They reinforced each other, and it becomes a situation where a home is a prison for children, and the cruelty is really shared among all the adults. They all sign on to it. And so this would be a family of folks where I would be looking at severe personality disorders. We talk about the cluster B disorders. I talk about that on the Tony Show all the time. So people who have a tendency to be psychopathic, who use other people, who are cruel, who don't have empathy. And when it gets into these kinds of cases of starving children and being so incredibly physically abusive to them, killing them, I look at sadism as a factor. And so that makes these people very, very dangerous. And when you get a group of them in the same family, the kids are in trouble.
Yeah, I know Carla had tried to push blame on Nanita, and then even Jacqueline. I mean, she does have a history of child abuse herself with the incident in 2024. So, definitely no empathy in the household, because you got a kid that's being tortured.
Right.
This isn't like, I'm not minimizing it, but this isn't like hitting a kid and then killing the kid. This is a kid that's slowly being tortured in the house. And for all three of them to allow this to happen with no sense of empathy, no sense of turning it around, no sense of feeding the child because she died of starvation. I mean, to me, I don't know, I'm not a mental health professional, but they have to have some level of would it be psychopathy? No level of empathy, because it was prolonged.
Yeah. The fact that this was this slow torture and they all witnessed it, and there was nobody that came forward and said, hey, we're not doing this, you need to knock it off. Nobody made a report. Nobody called the police. These people were in collusion. And therefore, I think they're all responsible. And it's interesting the way that they're trying to blame each other, at this point, which also just sounds sort of like criminal thinking. Rather than taking responsibility. But yeah, I would say you have a family of very pathological personalities that together amplified the danger.
Yeah, and I think similar to the Harrow case, you're probably going to get separate lawyers because they look like they're all tend to blame each other. I think Carla at one point was preparing to go on a podcast when I guess stuff was starting to hit the fan, and try to push more as the battered women or whatever, like basically playing the victim card, where at this point I don't care what happened, you got a child that was starving for 2 weeks and died. Anybody that would actually even want to say that she's the victim, in my mind, you'd be insane, because how would you compare that to someone who starved and a little kid that's 11 years old starving and dying in the course of 2 weeks? I mean, this girl didn't face death. She faced dying for however long until her body gave in. Because they don't believe there were signs of abuse here. They believe that she pretty much died, possibly from the malnourishment. So that's her body just. I did a couple of weeks ago. We talked about what happens when a young child starves, because it's not like an adult, and basically how organs would have. This girl would have suffered tremendously.
Yeah, just absolutely horrible. And you're right. Even if, let's say there was person who was more of the perpetrator than the others, the one that started the whole thing, and we don't know who that would be, everybody is still responsible for not stepping in. And there have been rare cases where a woman, let's say, has been so tremendously abused herself, tortured herself, and then the kids have been involved in that too, have been victimized in a similar way, where you can have some compassion and see, well, she was chained to the bed, she was beaten, she was tortured. So you can have a little bit more of insight into how it happened, but that clearly was not the case here.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I mean, even me, I work in a prison, and believe it or not, we still manage in the effort of hope that people can change. I think the whole system now is about hope and about how people can change. But when you see something like this, it's like, these are people that, in my mind, because of the length of it and how, I mean, there's no hope for these types of individuals, because at the end, you can't teach empathy.
No,
you either have it or you don't. And not
right.
one of them turned around out of all three, not once. So you're right. I totally agree that if there was no counter influence, because one could totally change the whole dynamic, they had to all three be totally supportive of it. Because one person could have cracked it. If you just had one of those three people could have just done something, it could have changed the whole dynamic. That's what, to me, as you mentioned, all three of them together just kind of reinforced it to where that girl, the moment she was pulled out of school, or maybe even slightly before that, she never had a chance.
Yeah, you're right. Right. And the thing about empathy, it is a brain process, and it has so much to do with the neurology, the neurobiology of how we're wired. And some people just come out miswired. And then depending on childhood experiences, we can sometimes try to help little kids develop more of it. But if you grow up without the wiring for empathy in your neurobiological system, you don't get it as an adult. Sometimes people can be taught to manage themselves better, and you probably see a lot of that going on in prison. You try to teach people impulse control and how to channel anger in healthier ways than acting out on other people. But if they're really bereft of the wiring for empathy, they just don't have it, and they continue to be people who are at risk of violence.
You know, speaking of that, and this wasn't one of the questions I thought of when I was trying to put the script together here, but on a sidebar here, I mean, if she would have survived, which we know she didn't, but if she would have survived, could she have recovered from this mentally?
Yeah, I like to hold hope too. I like to hold hope. And I think because she apparently had a good foundation with her grandmother, that, those foundational early years are when so much of the personality is developed, and people went through Auschwitz and recovered, people that had a good, in essence, a solid personality and a good upbringing, that you can go through a lot of trauma and you can heal. It doesn't mean you don't have some PTSD. It doesn't mean you don't have scars. It doesn't mean you don't fight to be a healthy person. You have to work really hard at it. But I do see people recover from trauma, and that is one of the things that keeps me going and having hope in this work, is seeing the resiliency of the human spirit, that people can go through hell and come out of things that they, we'd look at it and go, how can anybody come out of that and be okay? But people do. People can be amazingly resilient.
Yeah, I like how you brought the grandparents back in on that. That's very powerful. I want to go back real quick and talk about the DCF video call that was involved. So the DCF video call involved another child impersonating Mimi, which I don't know. They haven't really said which child that was. I don't know who it was that was impersonating that child. It'd be very interesting if that ever comes out. I mean, they're still in the court system now. I believe they just got the charges. So now we're going to go through the process of trial, if they go, whatever route they decide to go, all three of them. But from a practice perspective, what safeguards or verification steps should be mandatory in cases like this? Like how could this even happen?
Yeah, obviously they need to do in-person visits. Also, back in the 90s, I never worked for Department of Child Welfare or CPS, but I did have a contract with them for a while in California, where I would provide therapy for some of their kids that were in the system. And sometimes they were in a foster placement, sometimes they had been placed back with family. And when I was doing therapy with those kids, I always went out to the residence where they were living. I went to the home because I wanted, my own eyes to see in that environment, what is the environment like? Is this a nurturing home for kids? How do the other people in the home relate to them? What is their bedroom like? Do they have toys? Is it basically hygienic? Are they raised in a safe environment here? And how are they in the home? You have to spend time doing those things. There's no way you can do a quick video check-in. I mean, obviously you can substitute another child, so it's essentially worthless. And if you're not spending alone time with that child apart from the other adults, you really don't have a clue what's going on. So again, it looks like a cost-cutting measure. It looks like we've got to crank through all these cases, so let's do these quick video check-ins. It's a bad idea.
Were these type of check-ins being done this way before COVID, or did COVID kind of bring us to a world of convenience?
That's a really good question. I think it's a good guess that it started during COVID. And then they found that again, I think these departments are generally understaffed. They give far too many cases to the poor social workers. I have empathy for the social workers, who are trying to do impossible jobs and have a lot of stress on their shoulders. And it just became a way to check off the blanks and get through more cases, and seemed like an efficient way to do it. But it's a very bad idea.
And when I was following up on the case, and so they had an allegation somewhere towards the end of 2024 that they were looking into. At this point, Mimi had already died, and January of 2025 is when they did the call. They decided to follow up on Mimi as well. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't even think about the thought of them putting somebody in posing as the daughter. Do you think that happens a lot? Because I wouldn't even, for some reason that didn't come across my mind. And when they said it, it was like mind blowing how premeditated, how the cover up. I mean, just I'm sure that's going to hold a lot of weight when they go to trial, because, there's the chance of the fact, okay, listen, but you knew what you did. And these things are, you're moving the body, you're having calls with DIFUS where you have somebody faking that they're your daughter. But you think that happens a lot?
That's a really good question. And Anthony, I like it that you said it would never occur to you to do that. Would never occur to me either. But I think that we're saying we don't have a criminal mind. We don't think like, this kind of how to get around the rules all the time and how to get away with things. And again, it speaks of the way that these people go through the world and how they perceive things. And it's like, what can we do to get away with? That's a really good question. How often does that happen?
And you know what else it makes me think? So when you have all three people that are familiar with the system at some level, right? They knew they could also get away with it, which makes me think that they knew where the system blind spots were.
Right.
Because that could have exposed their game immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So they knew that they could do this and it be closed off without an issue. So they definitely had some involvement with Child Protective Services, which we know they did. There was the dead period between 2022 and the later end of 2024. But I think that because of those experiences, each time they had an experience, they knew how to work around.
Right.
And around. Right. And then eventually the ultimate end game was this 2025 where they were able just to lie right in front of their face and know there'd be no cover up. No follow up.
Yeah. It's a very different way of going through the world. There was a book that came out many years ago called The Criminal Mind by Stanton Samanow. And he was one of the first forensic psychologists to go through and define the way that a criminal looks at the world versus the way that the rest of us look at the world. And that if we're going to be working in forensics, you really need to understand that the whole way of looking at the world is different.
Opportunity and selfish gain, maybe, or
it's a part of it.
I'm definitely going to get that book now. So I have a book on manipulation, breaking boundaries. So there is, and sometimes people, me and Russ, a friend of mine, is usually on the show as well. We try to tell people that it's hard to get into a criminal's mind, because if you don't understand what their motives are, you will put enough of your own motives in there. Exactly. and try to give them a connection that could be empathetic that they really don't have.
That's the mistake. Yeah. Why do so many nice people, and I'll raise my hand, I've done it at one point. Why do so many nice people get romantically involved with people who are not nice? Because we don't think the way they do. Yeah. And we can't imagine someone that has ulterior motives that are manipulative, because we're not manipulative. We don't think that way. And I think that was one of my earliest lessons in grad school was, I have to understand that not everybody is honest. Not everybody means well. Not everybody is going to tell the truth. There are manipulative people out there. And that's, I think, a lesson many of us learn through the school of hard knocks, by getting involved with people like that. And then we come out of it wiser, hopefully.
Yeah. And then sometimes I've had Ann Salter on my show a while ago. We talked about predators. I used to work at a sex offender unit, civilly committed as well. And it's funny because sometimes we get shocked about the position more than the person. So there's no way a mother would do that, but she's not a mother.
Right.
You know, the role was there, but technically this is not a mother because the mother will be defined by these actions, or there's no way a priest would touch a child. They're not a priest.
Exactly.
They're playing the priest.
Exactly. Yeah. Her
So,
book on predators is great.
Oh, she was, yeah, if you ever have a chance, she was on my show a few times. If you look up Ant Salter Predators, I love that book, but she taught me a lot too, because she says, you know, in this world, you have to get in their heads, but you also have to protect yourself because you can't go too deep. And also you have to realize that some people you just can't save, and that, you know, like at the end of the day, I could do all this work, but they got a compulsion that cannot be controlled. And you know, it's not about giving up, but sometimes the win is knowing that they can't change and admitting
100%. 100%.
it.
Yeah. I think we're getting clearer on that. I think psychotherapy used to be very naive, and it was really geared toward healthier people. And this idea that everyone is capable of personal growth and everyone can go to therapy and everybody can change. So not true. Therapists are not magicians. And while we can help people with symptoms like anxiety and depression or relationship problems or obsessive compulsive disorder, you know, these normal kinds of things, we've got tools and we've got tricks that we can, you know, help people make some change if they're motivated to use them. But as far as getting in and changing core personality, we're not that powerful. I would love to be, but as I always say, if I could do that, if I were that powerful, I would have done it decades ago and fixed the world. And obviously I'm not that powerful.
Well, you know, I have the social workers that work by us, the mental health, they'll tell the inmates, you know, we don't save people here. Like, because that puts too much on us and less on you. Like, you know, I can't save you now. I feel just as guilty, and it's not that case. I'm not. You're responsible for you. We'll help guide you there, but I'm not here to save you. And another sidebar, because I only have like 3 more left. But one more, I have to ask you this because I kind of went into this. But if by chance Carla gets into the prison system, like I know what was unique. I had a friend of mine named Joe on the show, and we were talking about Rebecca Harrow. And we do believe, I'm not minimizing Rebecca's responsibility, but I like try to be totally objective. Looking at things. Plus, I'm also in the prison system itself, so I do have a belief that people there are people that can change, but there's people that can't. But with that said, Pangaro said that when they started to get the separate lawyers, and he had the public defender, and she had a vendor of the public defender, technically they just couldn't be represented by the same for conflict. He said that he would definitely he thought he could definitely play Rebecca because he felt somewhere along the line she was still that mother. Like he feels that she don't get me wrong, what she did is horrible, but he felt that she was more human than Jake. Let's do it that way. She felt that she was more human than Jake because he the black eye. He doesn't want people to forget that she could have been abused. Doesn't minimize what she's done. I want to put that out there. But if we can all be fair, if you have to do an approach to get someone to crack and you want to play the human side, who would you choose? You wouldn't choose Jake. He said, I would choose Rebecca. Mm-hmm. Now, the funny thing is, as we're discussing this, I actually don't see a human side in Carla, Jacqueline, or Nanita, right? If they came into a facility and you had to start addressing them to see if there's something that you can do for either getting them to take on some ownership or maybe seeing if they could admit that they were wrong, you think you could play the mother card with her, like maybe you could play with Rebecca?
That's a really good question, and it's hard to say without meeting her. I have worked in the domestic violence shelters with women who had been so battered themselves and so terrified, and they tended to come in not as psychopaths, but more dependent personalities, where they were very easily manipulated and controlled by the male who had perhaps hurt the child in addition to hurting them, or in one case even killed the child. And so if you have somebody who's more of a dependent person and a victim themselves with PTSD, there's more of an opening there, I think. But at this point, we don't really see evidence of that in this case, but it's hard to know until you sit down with them.
So you've actually seen cases where the woman is being controlled. So she's still responsible. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But there's still a chance that she's also under the influence of the abuser. So, I mean, does she still get to play the victim card?
It's a hard one,
That's a tough one, right?
and it's probably on a continuum with level of responsibility. I mean, there's no way to quantify that
Mhm.
exactly, but I think looking at it clinically, I can see some women that were so, what would we say, beaten down and had been so abused themselves physically and just didn't have the ego strength to stand up to him and do the right thing. And
Mm.
I think you can see that they have the capacity to be more normal when they're out from under that kind of abuse and control themselves. But does that mean that they shouldn't have protected their child? No, you always have to protect your child. But it's probably, there's a gray area where some people have been so hurt and so victimized themselves that they just don't seem to pull the energy up to do the right thing. And I can have a bit more compassion for that. I don't think they're hardcore psychopaths themselves.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because as I was just thinking, I mean, obviously she's still pleading not guilty, so it's like, well, how much control could he have on her at this point? Because now he's no longer present. But sometimes control could be when they're not present. That's how powerful some of these individuals could be. But for Carla, so when I did the Rebecca Harrow case, the Emmanuel Harrow, for Rebecca, I'm not saying it was like heavy, but there were a lot of people that felt something for her because of the black eye. They did.
Yeah.
They saw the black eye, and
Yeah.
Again, they're not minimizing what she's done, but they're saying, you know what, hold on, because she could also be bad. So they're trying to. I like what they're doing because they're trying to get a context, a picture, so we can better understand everything as a whole, so we can prevent. Because I mean, you could go after her, which will probably happen. But at the end of the day, if we were to put this to a broader picture, a bigger picture, do we have women that are being beat up that need to kind of have some intervention?
Yeah.
Where we may just say, well, it's easier to hold her responsible than for us to get involved.
Right.
So I like that perspective. But for Carla, for this mother here, I'm not getting it in my comments. I'm not getting people
Right.
coming in saying, because she tried to quickly push blame to Jonathan, Anita, and then she tried to shift to postpartum, which is funny because the things that truly are a concern get bastardized by defense teams or get bastardized by people looking to blame. Like you first, when the facts are against you and the facts are against you, you're going to try to blame, you're going to try to minimize, and then if it's a legal side, you're going to question due process. But in this case here, there was no sympathy. There was no, because the girl, that Mimi, was tortured.
Right.
This, it was I think in my mind, it was the 2 weeks or whatever it was of just watching your daughter, I mean, literally suffer, not get fed, and then die from, I'm assuming, all her organs just finally shutting down. So the stuff I got for Rebecca on my comments, I'm not getting the same for Carla at all. And I think that's why she went from my boyfriend made me do it to postpartum depression. I guess 11. Well, she had one, three later kids, which, so I think one was 9 months old. So, but it's crazy how there are people that they may not want to see the whole context. But I like to say, if we're doing shows like this, we're doing videos like this, then how do we tell a story where we can make us all have some level of ownership, so we all want to participate in the resolution. So it really does take a village to raise a child. In
It
my
sure does.
mind.
It sure does. And watching out for the other kids in the neighborhood, noticing strange behavior with the Turpin family with 13 kids. Neighbors noticed weird things. They knew there was this family of kids that never came outside and were never seen. And they'd march them around the house in the middle of the night because they made them sleep during the daytime and kept them up all night when people wouldn't see anything. So yeah, if you see something, say something, because we really do all need to watch out for each other, particularly for children.
Yeah, and I got so I have three more real quick. I know you're busy. I know you, so I appreciate your time. So Mimi had lived safely with her grandmother for years before being returned to her mother, and we kind of touched on this briefly. But how can social workers, child protective services, all that, better assess readiness and risk before reunification? Because law enforcement reacts. Their job is to I mean, to be honest, their job really is to react and look for the case, prosecute. Child Protective Services is really the prevention and intervention. I mean, I'm not trying to defer or blame, but I want to make sure we put things where they got to be. So if you address a concern, you put your energy where it matters. So for me, it's the Child Protective Services that prevent and maybe I would say intervene, but then law enforcement starts to come into the intervention side and the reaction side. So how can Child Protective Service better assess readiness and risk before reunification? Do they look at the mother's history? Do they add a little more oversight because the mother has a history of being in the system for aggressive behavior? I mean, is there something that was missed that could have been prevented?
This is one of the things about our country. I think we have a very fragmented system, and it's handled very different ways from state to state and even from county to county. I'm a big believer in a full-on psychological evaluation whenever there's an issue of custody. Does the child stay with the grandparents? Does the child go with mother? Does the child go with father? Everybody needs a psych eval, and that needs to be in depth. It takes time and it costs money. And then I also think when you're doing an evaluation like that, you need not an intern, but you need an experienced mental health therapist that will do what I used to do, which is go out into the home and spend time observing and look at everybody's history. And that includes their criminal history, their substance abuse history, their social history, what kind of people do they hang out with. And you need to take all that information together, which is a lot of information, and get that into the court. And at that point, make recommendations. And I don't think that we fund the system to work to that degree. I think now they're probably given checklists and you check off the box, and you have parents go to parenting classes sometimes where it's like 6 visits where they learn the right answers. That's not enough to actually make any kind of an impact on people's ability to parent. And I think we're not doing a good job. And we need, if we care about kids, we say we care about kids, we need to fund this the right way, and we need to be comprehensive.
You kind of cross right into the last question, because for me, with Mimi right here, I mean, this wasn't a child that disappeared. This was a child that was slowly brought out of our awareness. The moment they brought the child out of school, all of a sudden there was nobody looking closer anymore. Mm-hmm. I guess, I mean, you want to protect the vulnerable, but how do we provide resources to the people that need to look a little bit closer? As I said, we mentioned it before, when she was pulled out of this school. I mean, this starts to get to you too, because I wonder, I got a daughter that's going to be 13, another one that's going to be 9. You wonder if this little girl knew what was happening, knew that when her mother pulled her out of school, did she know that was it for her? I mean, not just the torment she went through physically, but mentally. Yeah. I mean, once she knew, she could have said, "Well, school's gonna know. School's gonna know, Mom. School's gonna know," because was an 11-year-old girl. I'm sure she talked back, 10-year-old. School's gonna know, and the mother took that out. I mean, this girl really saw every inch of hope. Oh, my Aunt Jacqueline will be over. She'll see this, and Jacqueline got along with her, or my grandparents are going to fight for me. They're going to fight for me, and they can't even get in. My father is going to come for me, and father doesn't show up in court. Mm-hmm. Every bit of hope that this girl possibly had dwindled. So this girl died. To my mind, this girl died. What is it? This girl died. She died with no hope. I think her mindset went first, knowing that, what, I'm going to give myself permission to go.
Yeah,
because at this point, it's coming. Because I guarantee you, every spot, this girl probably knew what would be her outs, and they took it away from her one by one by one. And once you take that child's hope away, she had no want to live. Yeah. And then she gave in my opinion, because it's just horrible to know that this girl went through sparks of what could have been hope. Someone's going to save me. Someone's going to save me. Someone's going to save me. And then just being plucked out.
Yeah.
One by one.
Yeah, it's important we talk about these cases, because I think as a culture, you know, when most of us love our children and do the best job we can nurturing them and taking care of them, and it's just hard to imagine that there could be neighbors or people around us who behave like this. And it's something that we need to keep our focus on, and we need to make sure we fund protection agencies and get schools coordinating, and who knows how many lives will be saved down the road because people are more aware by talking about it.
Yep. And it's crazy because in my profession, you have to treat people fairly when they come in. But man, it's like, you know what, knowing what someone done versus how they done it. You know, it's like when I worked with sex offenders, I would tell people, you know what, knowing what they've done is one thing. But when you're management and you're close to reading those files, you know how they done it. That's where the job becomes very, very difficult. I could generalize actions all day, but when you actually see what some of these people have done, when you read about what they have done, and then I have to work around them and give them the blanket when they want the blanket, when they would never give anybody that level of empathy in the real world. You know, but to have to do that takes a lot about, says a lot about the people that work in those positions in corrections, everywhere from the civilian side to the custodial side because the civilians also know deeply what these people have done, because it's part of what they need to know in order to try to introduce some level of ownership and change. Their last thing before it closes, they're going to try to do Mimi's Law. They're trying to put stuff together. You kind of touched on this actually, but you know, to try to create a better system. It's going to touch on homeschooling, resources for child protective services, a bunch of things. And I think you kind of touched on it, but if you could make one of the biggest differences in catching abuse before it turns fatal, what would you like to see? I mean, really, if we had to put some money towards something, what would you like to see that money go towards?
Yeah, I think it's the funding of the agencies, because there are wonderful people who work in the system as social workers. I've had many of them as clients, and they come to therapy themselves burned out with PTSD from crime scene photos, from reading the medical reports. And these folks suffer, they struggle, and they tend to not last very long because of the difficulty of the work. So if we can fund the system better, give them the support they need, not load them down with hundreds of cases, you know, we're putting them through the mill, and we're making them sick. And then when there's a bad outcome, they're in trouble, you know? So I think we need to prioritize the care of children, and that is certainly one way to do it. Let's fund the protection agencies and give them support.
I think, Shavaun, you're amazing. I would love to get you to meet a friend of mine named Denise Schoenwall. She's been on my show a couple of times as well. You guys are both authors. I would love to sit back and let you ladies talk shop, because I could just learn from both you ladies all day. You are just exceptional. Tell Tony I said thank you. I may have to use you again because I'm not done with this case. I would do a Melody Buzzard. But there's another case I would love to discuss with you in the near future. Just let me know what your availability is. I know you're very busy. We were talking about the Jesse Mack Butler case. He's this kid, was like 17, pretty much strangled two young girls, tried to sexually assault them, watched, you know, videotaped them, and then the system made him a youth offender, and what looked like could have been, he wasn't ever sentenced to it, but could have been 78 years. They wind up knocking it down to I don't know what's
a year of supervision and counseling. So again, send him to a therapist once a week, and he's going to be transformed. Because
I wanted to cover two things with you in the future. You know, so just text me when your next availability is one. Let's talk about that mindset of that individual. You know, I mean, is this someone who most likely is going to repeat again? I mean, he strangles people. That's a crime that escalates in my mind. I still think the Keon King case, I know he shot Kata Scott, but he had a history of strangling. I think he probably wanted to strangle her, but couldn't control her enough and shot her. My guess.
Yeah, strangulation is a very, very, very red flag, neon sign for potential homicide. So very dangerous.
Yeah, so I would love to discuss that mindset of his, but also what's the mindset of the victims when they feel the system didn't do enough? And I would love to share that with you. So when you know, if you don't mind, if you could text me, let me know when your next availabilities are, because I try to cover them as fast as I can. So I'll be on your time. And then would you like to say anything closing, like your books? You said you have a couple books. Where could they get the books? I would just love to know a little bit more about you before we close.
Yeah. I have written on several interesting topics. Probably one of the best known ones is The Mind of Mass Killers, Understanding and Interrupting the Pathway to Violence. And that's a fairly thick, comprehensive book, and focus more on the school shooters and that kind of crime. But I see so much misinformation every time one of these awful things happens. And I got tired of trying to correct everybody on social media. So I just sat down and wrote a book on it, and it got published. And that's how I ended up being invited on so many true crime shows after that book came out. And then I wrote one, I was a contributing editor on a book called Wounded: The Forgotten Survivors of Gun Violence, telling the stories of people who were shot in various situations and what their journey back to healing, the ones that lived, was like. And that's being used as a textbook. And then my recent book is called Nightbird, a Memoir. And that's my own story about making all the mistakes that I tell kids don't make the mistakes I made. So it's a fairly intense, but I promise it's not a boring book. So all those are available wherever books are sold.
Well, if you ever want to, I would love, maybe we could do an episode, whatever book you want, we could have a discussion on your books. My audience would love that. If you want to discuss the book that's the most closest to you, the personal one, the last book, I would be honored if you would like to share your thoughts on that book.
That would be great.
So let's we could always do that first. Just let me know what your availability is. We'll set it up. And then, I'll pick up the book today. Is it on Kindle?
It is not on Kindle. It's on audio and paperback, and give me your mailing information and I'll see that you get a copy.
Okay. I like to support. Could I get it on Amazon?
It's on Amazon. Yeah. And it's Nightbird, one word, by Shavaun Scott, Nightbird, a Memoir. And if you like audio, I narrated the book myself, so you can hear it all in my own voice.
I'll probably take the audio because I can listen on my trip to New Hampshire over the weekend.
You can listen. It's a quick read. People tell me it's exciting, and I like reading memoir, but I like memoir that get to the point. Let's get to the meat of the story. And sometimes people go off on all these tangents that aren't really, necessarily that important to the story. And so mine is like, I nail right into, I think, the essence of the point I'm trying to make. So and it has a lot to do with the criminal mind. So
I could listen to you all day. So I'm going to actually be listening to this on my way to New Hampshire. It gives me something to look forward to for that 7-hour drive. So consider that done. And, guys, if you're interested, this is Shavaun Scott. Let me, the spelling is, you have an email at all, or do you give that out at all? Or
yeah. Anyone's welcome to email me. It's just my name, Shavaun, Shavaun, Shavaun Scott @gmail.com. And you can always go to my website at shavaunscott.com. Pretty
perfect.
Easy.
And thank you again for your excellence, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show. And as always, everyone, the show is Tear Talk. Don't forget, I have Buy Me a Cup of Coffee. You'll find it in the description of these episodes, or also up on the title of the channel. And as always, guys, stay safe.